I'm proud of all my kids, except one, my mother announced at my sister's graduation dinner, looking directly at me. So I slipped an envelope into her glass and watched her face turn white as she read what was inside. What happened next changed our family forever, and honestly, I have zero regrets. Let me back up and give you some context, because this story is about 30 years in the making. My name is Elena Vasquez, I'm 30 years old. And I've spent my entire life being the disappointment child in what everyone else calls the perfect Vasquez family. Not the black sheep that would imply I did something rebellious or scandalous. I was just one who never quite measured up, no matter how hard I tried. Picture this: Sunday evening, May 15th, at the sprawling Vasquez family estate in Sedona, Arizona. My mother, Esperanza, had spent 3 days preparing for my youngest sister Catalina's medical school graduation celebration. The house looked like something out of Architectural Digest, all adobe walls, exposed wooden beams, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the red rock formations in the distance. Every surface gleamed, every flower arrangement was perfectly positioned, and the smell of her famous mole poblano filled the air. The whole extended family was there. My father, Alejandro, who owned a chain of successful restaurants across Arizona and New Mexico. My older brother, Santiago, 32, the golden boy who just made partner at the most prestigious law firm in Phoenix. My middle sister Gabriela, 28, who'd recently been promoted to senior marketing director at a Fortune 500 company and had just bought her second investment property. And of course, Catalina, 24. The baby of the family who had not only graduated from medical school but had been accepted into a competitive residency program at Johns Hopkins. Then there was me, Elena, the graphic designer who worked freelance from her modest apartment in Flagstaff. Drove a 2015 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door from a parking lot incident I couldn't afford to fix, and whose biggest accomplishment that month was landing a logo design contract for a local organic bakery that paid me barely enough to cover my student loans. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't a failure by normal standards. I had a college degree in fine arts, I made a decent living doing what I loved, and I was proud of the work I created. But in the Vasquez family, decent was equivalent to disappointing. Excellence wasn't just expected, it was the baseline. Anything less was treated as a personal affront to the family name. The dining room had been transformed for the occasion. Catalina's medical school colors, navy blue and gold, were everywhere. Balloons hung from the chandelier, a custom banner reading Dr. Catalina Vasquez stretched across the fireplace, and a 4-tier cake decorated with fondant stethoscopes and medical symbols set as the centerpiece. The table was set with my mother's finest china, the kind that only came out for major celebrations. Crystal glasses caught the light from the sunset streaming through the windows, and everything looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about successful Mexican-American families. I arrived exactly on time, wearing the one dress I owned that met my mother's standards, a navy blue sheath dress I'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago. As I walked through the front door, I could hear the laughter and conversation already in full swing. Family, friends, neighbors, colleagues, and extended relatives filled the living room, all eager to congratulate the newest doctor in the family. My tia Rosa was the first to spot me. "Elena, Mija, come here and tell me about your little art projects." She meant well, but the way she said little art projects with that patronizing smile made my stomach clench. This was how my career was always discussed, as a hobby, a phase I was going through before I got serious about life. "They're going well, tia. I'm working on some exciting new clients," I replied, forcing a smile. "That's nice, Mija. When are you going to find a nice man and settle down like your sister Gabriela? She's so happy with her Eduardo. And they just bought that beautiful house in Paradise Valley." Before I could answer, my cousin Miguel appeared with his wife Carmen and their twin boys. "Elena, how's the starving artist life treating you?" He laughed at his own joke while Carmen shot him a disapproving look. "I'm doing fine, Miguel. Congratulations on the promotion, by the way." I'd heard through the family grapevine that he'd been promoted to regional manager at his insurance company. Thanks, yeah, things are really taking off. Carmen and I are looking at vacation homes in Cabo. You should come visit sometime, well, when you can afford the trip. Another laugh, another gut punch disguised as family banter. This was how it always went. Every family gathering was a subtle reminder of my place in the hierarchy. Santiago would talk about his latest high-profile case. Gabriela would show off photos from her recent business trip to New York. Catalina would share updates about her research or her latest academic achievement. And I would stand there, smiling and nodding, feeling smaller with each conversation. I made my way to the kitchen where my mother was putting the finishing touches on dinner. Esperanza Vasquez was a force of nature -5 of pure determination. Wrapped in a perfectly tailored dress and immaculate makeup, at 58, she looked like she could be 45. And she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had built an empire alongside my father. "Elena, you're here," she said without looking up from the platter she was arranging. "Help me carry these to the dining room, and be careful, that china belonged to your great-grandmother. No hug, no how are you, just immediate delegation to help with the work." This too was my role in the family, the designated helper, the one who could be counted on to carry plates and set up chairs and clean up afterward while the others basked in celebration. As I carefully transported platters of food, I listened to the conversations swirling around me. Santiago was describing a recent case where he'd helped a tech startup navigate a complex merger. Gabriela was talking about her company's expansion into international markets. Catalina was being modest about her research on pediatric cardiology while everyone marveled at her brilliance. The dinner bell actually rang. Because my mother had installed an antique brass bell in the dining room that she used for special occasions. Everyone gathered around the extended table that could seat 16 people comfortably. My father, as always, sat at the head, my mother to his right. The seating arrangement was no accident, it reflected the family hierarchy perfectly. Santiago sat closest to our parents with his wife Isabella and their daughter. Gabriela was next with her fiancé Eduardo. Catalina, as the guest of honor, had the spot of honor directly across from our parents, and I was seated at the far end of the table, between my teenage cousins and next to the kitchen door, perfectly positioned to jump up and help serve when needed. As we began eating, my father stood up to make a toast. Alejandro Vasquez commanded attention when he spoke. His success in business had given him a natural authority, and when he raised his glass, the entire table fell silent, family and friends. He began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Tonight we celebrate not just Catalina's graduation, but the continuation of a legacy. When your mother and I came to this country 40 years ago, we had nothing but dreams and determination. Tonight, we have a daughter who will save lives, a son who fights for justice, and another daughter who builds brands and creates jobs." He paused to smile at each of his successful children in turn. "We always told our children that in America, anything is possible if you work hard and never give up on your dreams of excellence." I noticed he didn't mention me in his list of achievements. The omission felt like a physical blow, but I kept my smile fixed in place. I'd had 30 years of practice. The conversation during dinner was lively and celebratory. Extended family members shared stories about Catalina's childhood, her determination, her academic excellence. My mother beamed as she recounted how Catalina had announced at age 8 that she wanted to be a doctor and had never wavered from that goal. "She's always been so focused," Esperanza said proudly. "Even as a little girl, she would play doctor with her dolls while other children were just playing games. We knew she was special." My tío Carlos raised his glass. "To the doctor in the family, the first of many generations to come, I'm sure." Everyone laughed and agreed. Catalina blushed prettily and thanked everyone for their support. She was genuinely lovely, kind, smart, hardworking. I couldn't hate her for being everything I wasn't. But sitting there, listening to the endless praise, feeling invisible despite being surrounded by family, that familiar ache in my chest grew stronger. As the evening progressed, the gifts were presented. Santiago and Isabella gave Catalina a beautiful stethoscope engraved with her initials. Gabriella and Eduardo presented her with a leather medical bag from an expensive European brand. My parents gave her a check. I couldn't see the amount, but from Catalina's reaction, it was substantial. When it came time for my gift, I felt every eye in the room turn to me. I'd spent weeks working on something special, a custom illustration of Catalina and her white coat. Surrounded by symbols representing her journey to becoming a doctor, I'd had it professionally printed and framed, and I was proud of the work. "This is beautiful, Elena," Catalina said genuinely as she unwrapped it. "You're so talented." "It's very nice, Mija," my mother added, but her tone was polite rather than impressed. "You could probably sell things like this at the farmer's market." The farmer's market? As if my art was something suitable for selling alongside homemade jam and organic vegetables. The dismissal was casual, effortless, and devastating. As the evening wound down and we moved to the living room for coffee and cake, I found myself standing alone by the windows, looking out at the desert landscape. The sun was setting, painting the red rocks in brilliant oranges and purples. It was beautiful, peaceful. And I wished I could escape into that landscape instead of standing here feeling like a stranger in my own family. That's when it happened, the moment that would change everything. My mother was holding court in the center of the living room, surrounded by guests who were still singing Catalina's praises. Someone, I think it was my father's business partner, asked her about her children. "You must be so proud of all of them," he said. "What an accomplished family." And that's when Esperanza Vasquez, my mother, the woman who had given birth to me and raised me for 30 years, said the words that would finally push me over the edge. "I'm proud of all my kids. Except one." She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew exactly who she meant. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt every eye in the room shift toward me, some with pity, others with embarrassment for having witnessed such a brutal public rejection. My face burned with humiliation. My hands started shaking. 30 years of being the disappointment, 30 years of trying to earn her approval. Minus 1 years of feeling like I was never enough, and she had just confirmed it in front of our entire extended family and friends. But something else happened in that moment, something unexpected. Instead of crumbling, instead of running away in tears like I might have done when I was younger, I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Clarity, resolution, the final piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve my entire life. I excused myself quietly and walked to the kitchen, my mind racing. In my purse, I had something I'd been carrying for 3 months. Something I'd discovered by accident and had been debating whether to use. An envelope containing documents that would shatter my mother's perfect world just as completely as she had just shattered mine. The envelope contained proof of something that would destroy the carefully constructed image she'd spent decades building. Something that would reveal the truth about the perfect Esperanza Vasquez and her judgment of her children's worth. I pulled the envelope from my purse and stared at it. 3 months ago, I would have thrown it away rather than hurt my family. But 3 months ago, my mother hadn't just publicly declared me a disappointment in front of everyone we knew. I walked back to the living room where she was still accepting congratulations on her wonderful children, all except one. I watched her for a moment. This woman who had given me life but had spent 30 years making me wish I was someone else. She was holding a glass of wine, gesturing elegantly as she spoke. Her manicured nails caught the light from the chandelier. She looked every inch the successful matriarch, the proud mother, the pillar of the community. I approached quietly, slipping the envelope into her wine glass when she wasn't looking. Then I stepped back and waited. When she reached for her glass, she noticed the envelope immediately. "What's this?" she asked, pulling it out with a confused laugh. "Someone's playing jokes now. Open it," I said quietly. My voice was steady, calm. I felt strangely peaceful. She looked at me suspiciously but tore open the envelope. As her eyes scanned the contents, I watched her face change. The color drained from her cheeks. Her confident smile disappeared. Her hands began to tremble. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" I replied. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The room had gone quiet again. People sensed something was happening but didn't understand what. My father moved closer to his wife, concerned by her sudden pallor. "Esperanza, what is it?" he asked. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear, respect, and for the first time in my life, she saw me as someone with power instead of someone who was powerless. "We need to talk," she said quietly, privately, but I wasn't done. 30 years of being invisible, of being dismissed, of being the disappointment, it was time for that to end. "No," I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think we've done enough talking privately. I think it's time for some honesty in this family." The silence in the room was suffocating. 23 people, family members, family friends, neighbors who had known us for decades, all staring at the woman they thought they knew, watching her world begin to crumble in real time. My mother, Esperanza Vasquez, the woman who had, just minutes before, declared herself proud of all her children except one, was now clutching a piece of paper like it might burst into flames. Her perfectly applied lipstick had left a stain on the rim of her wine glass, and for the first time in my life, I saw her hands shake. "Elena," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "please. Not here. Not now." But I was done with not here and not now. I was done with protecting her feelings while she trampled on mine. I was done being the family disappointment who quietly absorbed every insult, every dismissal, every casual cruelty disguised as tough love. "Actually, Mom, I think here and now is perfect," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "After all, you didn't have any problem announcing your feelings about me in front of everyone. Why should I be more considerate than you were?" My father, Alejandro, stepped forward with the authoritative presence that usually ended family disputes. Before they began, "Elena, whatever this is about, we can discuss it as a family. Privately." I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. It wasn't bitter or angry, it was genuinely amused. "Privately." Like how we privately discussed my career choices, like how we privately talked about my life decisions. Oh wait, we didn't. Those conversations happened right here, in front of everyone, didn't they? My brother Santiago moved closer, his lawyer instincts kicking in. He could sense a situation spiraling out of control and was trying to manage the damage. "Elena, you're upset. Let's take a step back and—" "I'm not upset, Santiago," I interrupted him calmly. "I'm awake. For the first time in 30 years, I'm completely, totally awake." I turned back to my mother, who was still staring at the document in her hands like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Tell them what's in your hand, Mom. Tell them about the Esperanza Vasquez they don't know." She looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw something I'd never seen directed at me before. Fear. Not concern, not disappointment, not irritation, actual fear. She was afraid of me, of what I knew, of what I might say next. "This is between us," she said, her voice gaining strength as she tried to reassert control. "This is family business, I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Like when you told Mrs. Rodriguez that I was still figuring myself out at 30. Like when you introduced me to your book club as the artistic one with that special tone that made it clear it wasn't a compliment. Like when you told Tia Rosa that you hoped I'd find my way eventually right in front of me." The room was so quiet I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantelpiece. Catalina looked uncomfortable, Gabriela was staring at her hands, and Santiago kept glancing between our parents and me like he was watching a tennis match. My cousin Miguel, who had made the starving artist joke earlier, cleared his throat nervously. "Maybe we should give you all some space to work this out." "No," I said firmly. "Stay. Please. I want witnesses for this." That's when my mother's survival instincts fully kicked in. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her dress, and gave me the look that had been silencing me my entire life, the look that said I was being dramatic, inappropriate, embarrassing. "Elena Sofia Vasquez," she said, using my full name like she had when I was a child caught misbehaving, "you will stop this nonsense right now. Whatever you think you know. Whatever game you think you're playing, it ends here." But her voice wavered on the last word. The paper in her hands was trembling, and everyone in that room could see that the unshakable Esperanza Vasquez was shaken. I took a step closer to her, close enough that only she could hear my next words. The Riverside Community Bank. Account number 847,392,651. Ring any bells? Mom, the color that had been slowly returning to her face drained away again instantly. She actually swayed slightly, and my father reached out to steady her. Esperanza, what is she talking about? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. Because what I held over her head wasn't just embarrassing, it was criminal, and she knew that I knew it. I straightened up and addressed the room. 3 months ago, I was doing some freelance work for Rivera Community Center, you know, the one that helps immigrant families with job training and English classes. They needed help organizing their financial records for a grant application. I paused, letting the significance of that sink in. Rivera Community Center was my mother's pet charity. She was on the board of directors. She hosted fundraising galas. She was photographed for the society pages presenting oversized checks to grateful recipients. That's where I found some interesting discrepancies. I continued, donations that were recorded as received but never actually made it to the center's accounts. Grant money that was supposed to go to programming but somehow got redirected. My mother's breathing was becoming shallow. My father was staring at her with growing alarm. Elena, she said. Her voice barely audible, you don't understand what you're talking about, don't I? I pulled my phone from my purse. Because I have copies of everything. Bank records, transfer documents, forged signatures, all of it. And I've already shared it with someone very interesting. The lie came easily. I hadn't shared it with anyone yet, but watching her face, I knew I'd hit the target dead center. Who? She whispered. Does it matter? I asked, echoing her dismissive tone from earlier. The question is, what are you going to do about it? My Aunt Rosa, who had made the comment about my little art projects, spoke up nervously. Elena, Mija, maybe you should think about what you're saying. These are serious accusations. I turned to her with a smile that felt foreign on my face, confident, self-assured, powerful. You're absolutely right, Tia. They are serious accusations. That's why I was so careful to document everything properly before I said anything. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Family members were looking at each other with confusion and concern. My mother's carefully constructed image was cracking in real time, and everyone could see it happening. Santiago, ever the lawyer, stepped forward again. Elena, if you have evidence of financial irregularities, the appropriate action would be to what? Santiago. I cut him off. Report it to the authorities. Funny you should mention that. Another lie, but an effective one. I watched my mother's knees buckle slightly. You see, I continued, addressing the room but keeping my eyes on her. I've spent 30 years being told I'm not smart enough, not successful enough, not good enough to be a real member of this family. But it turns out, I'm smart enough to read financial records. I'm successful enough to recognize fraud when I see it. And I'm definitely good enough to know the difference between right and wrong. My father found his voice. Esperanza, is this true? What is she talking about? But my mother couldn't speak. She was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not as the disappointing daughter who couldn't live up to the family standards, but as someone dangerous. Someone who held her fate in her hands. The irony is beautiful, isn't it? I said softly. All these years, you've been disappointed in me for not being more like you. Well, congratulations, Mom. I'm exactly like you. I'm just better at not getting caught. That wasn't true either. I would never steal from a charity that helped vulnerable families. But she didn't know that, and in that moment, watching her realize that her failure of a daughter had the power to destroy everything she'd built, I felt something I'd never experienced in this house before. I felt like I belonged here. Like I was finally worthy of being a Vasquez, because for the first time in my life, I was the one holding all the cards.